time, and that means it's time to celebrate death. I'm Angeline Duran, and I am going to do a series of short videos about the topic of death in the ancient Southwest. We're going to talk about parties, funerals, mummies, and even dogs. I've decided to make this intro festive because the Southwesterners are known for Dia de los Muertos, an Aztec tradition that may even go back further than that. And it's a time to celebrate the dead and remember our ancestors. We love to invite them back to have a good party with us. So let's have a little death party and talk about some death customs of the ancient Southwest. I'm also taking this opportunity to shamelessly promote my handmade bead art. If you love these videos, or if you get something out of it, or you enjoy it, a really nice way for you to give back might be to purchase a gift for somebody else or for yourself. I made some specifically for this season of Dia de los Muertos. I also make meditation mandalas based on Eye of God, prayer mats, and ceremonial bowls. So check out my website, theancientsouthwest.com. Thank you for that, and now on with the show. I think we can all agree that we're intrigued by a good mystery. For example, I am intrigued by the mystery of these light rays that no matter how I position this camera, if I want this window behind me, I'm gonna have to deal with this light stabbing me in the face. So it's a mystery how to make it not do that. Probably hang some curtains. I'm not gonna do that. So here we go. I'm shiny today. Rock art is one of those things that intrigues us, especially about the ancient Southwest, because it seems so exotic and so mysterious and unknowable and unreadable. It seems like it comes from the mind of unfathomable distances of generations past and modes of thought that can't be recovered. It seems that way, but it doesn't necessarily mean it is that way. And some of these images, especially the more recent images, say from the Pueblo period to now, are readable. And that is thanks to some amazing research that's been done by people who are dedicated to the study of symbolism. And I want to give a really big shout out to this wonderful archaeologist named James R. Kunkel, who did a tremendous amount of work in Arizona with the White Mountain Archaeology Center. And what he did was he studied pots, and he studied the imagery on pots, and he learned how to read the pots. He did research on the pots themselves, and then he also consulted with tribe members in the area to verify the findings. And he came up with a whole language of imagery that was in Pueblo pottery, but also translates into rock art. This is a wonderful breakthrough and a really good starting place for reading the rocks, starting with the Pueblo period, which would have been about, I don't know, the year 1300, maybe even a little bit before, until the Spanish or European influx into the American Southwest. So, what is rock art? It's a form of writing, right? It's a proto-writing. Ancient people would use these modes of recording ideas so that ceremonial ideas or creation stories, important stories that people needed to remember from generation to generation, could be remembered and repeated faithfully. It's a form of mnemonics. Like if you're trying to learn how to read music and you've got the notes that are in the spaces, it's face, F-A-C-E. So these are mnemonics. First of all, there's a concept that you have to be aware of. And you've probably heard me talk about this in some of my other videos, but in the ancient Southwest, there's this conception of reality in which there are planes of existence: the underworld, the earthly plane, and the heavenly realm. And sometimes this can be thought of as anything that's in a cave kind of is representative of the underworld. Things that are in the earthly realm is where we are, and then the heavenly realm, a lot of times that has to do with the stars and what's happening up there and what they might represent. These are physical representations of these concepts, but then there's some kind of just abstract representations of these concepts, and that can be concentric circles, and it can be some of these other images which we'll discuss. One image that deals with the planes of existence is the centipede. That's often represented with a vertical line that's crossed with a great number of horizontal lines. It also sometimes is called a ladder. And the basic definition or interpretation of this centipede image is a transition from one plane of existence to the other. You're either traveling from the earthly realm down the ladder into the underworld or up the ladder into the heavenly realm, but you're transitioning your plane of existence. And because the centipede has this aspect of transitioning between the levels of existence, then in turn the centipede kind of adopts a quality as the guide between these planes of existence. And when does a person transition between planes of existence? In trance, certainly, but death is when we as living people transition into a different plane of existence. We cease to operate on the earthly plane, and we, in the ancient Southwestern tradition, would go into the underworld. Or in the Pueblo times, things got a little bit more confusing. So there were a variety of different belief systems happening at the same time, sort of in the same geographical areas, depending on what tribes were representing these thoughts. So we also have people ascending into the heavens, ascending to the spirit road, which was the Milky Way. So the centipede could also be lifting someone from this earthly realm into walk with the ancestors in the heavenly realm. When you see a spiral that's associated with an anthropomorph, a person image, it can represent that person's whirlwind, their life breath, their life energy. And if you see that person's whirlwind descending out of their body, that means they're transitioning. Their life breath is leaving, their whirlwind is leaving their physical body and transitioning into death. This is a really crazy image from Mimbres pottery that has every kind of death symbol in it possible. We've got a person with an arrow through his middle, so clearly he has been mortally wounded. His whirlwind is leaving his body. He has his arms and legs splayed and facing upwards, which means he's floating, he's ascending. He's got this kind of halo effect happening around his head. He's lifting out up into a spiritual plane, and he's holding the death symbol of the centipede. Everything in this image says this person is transitioning from life into death. And this is a perfect example of the kind of imagery that helps us interpret rock art, because it's really clear what's happening in this picture. So once you understand the parts of this picture and how they work together, we can parse them out when we see these same images independently in different rock art panels. Sometimes in Pueblo petroglyphs, you'll see this really clear death mask image. It looks almost like a skull. The shape of it is a very round head, and it has really prominent big round dot eyes, and sometimes like a rectangular mouth, or even maybe teeth, or just a hole for a mouth. It looks deathly. It looks like a mask of some kind, and it is interpreted as a death image. I always kind of wondered why. I thought, well, I don't know, it just looks kind of simplistic to me. It's dots for eyes and a mouth. I mean, I guess it could vaguely represents like a skull or something, but why do we know for sure this is death? What removed any shadow of a doubt that that's exactly what that image is. It's a perfect representation of a death mask from the American tradition. Now, not necessarily originating in the American Southwest, but where I saw it was in South America, in Peru. The death shroud of the mummies in Peru. They were covered with a cloth, and then over the face was embroidered, as clear as anything, the exact same imagery that shows up in this Pueblo death mask image in petroglyphs. It couldn't be more similar. I can't say how that image traveled, because that image doesn't show up in the rocks before the Pueblo period, but clearly that idea traveled. Another image that you'll see a lot in Pueblo petroglyphs is a person who's upside down, and that also symbolizes death, especially if you can orient how you're supposed to look at this person. This dude clearly standing on the ground, because this is the up. Him not so much. If you get a headless person, or he has something falling out from between his legs. That means dead. And one thing that James R. Kunkel pointed out that I think is really clever is he compared some of this imagery to the Native American sign language. And the image for dead, or the sign for dead, would be like this. You know, it turns upside down. We could go on and on about this. We could get into spirit helpers and gods and different kinds of gods and what they're in charge of, and different kinds of spirits and what they're in charge of and how they represent in the rocks, and more abstract imagery that represents death. There are insects and different kinds of animals that are death related. But this is just kind of an interesting little beginning place, I think. Some ways when you're out exploring and you're looking at the rocks, you can keep your eyes open for some of these things, and you can start to read the rocks and understand when some images represent death. And we're not guessing. These are things that have been studied and documented, and it's exciting to be able to speak with confidence about what some of these images mean. People like to come up with a lot of interesting theories or guesses or personal opinions about what different kinds of rock art means, but it doesn't really mean much unless it comes from the mouths of the people. And the images I talked about today have been studied in cooperation with people of tribes. Perhaps in my reiteration of these interpretations, I've made some mistakes, and if I've done that, I apologize, but I'm repeating it as faithfully as I can remember it and doing my best. So have fun with that, and happy Dia de los Muertos!